With the Industrial Revolution beginning in 18th century Great Britain and continuing through the 19th, European powers like Great Britain, Germany, France, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and Italy increasingly come to dominate the world both economically and militarily, driven by the power of machines and factories. These nations are scrambling to colonize Africa, South Asia, and other territories, with Britain and France taking the largest shares. Meanwhile, the United States is emerging as a growing power in the Americas, and Japan is establishing itself as the leading force in Asia. As European nations expand their territories and rise to global dominance, a powerful wave of nationalism sweeps across the continent, driving each country to see itself as superior to others. European politicians and thinkers of the time, captivated by their country's achievements on the world stage, begin to promote the idea that their culture, language, and ethnicity are not only distinct but inherently superior. They compare the celebrated qualities of their own nations with those of the underdeveloped peoples they now rule in Africa and Asia, encouraging their citizens to believe, "We are advanced because of our complex culture," while asserting they are poor because of theirs. This worldview, of course, gives rise to a hierarchy of superior and inferior peoples, ultimately fueling alarmingly high levels of racism across Europe. Within this context, Jews, already a minority in each European country, face renewed, escalating violence, including assaults, property destruction, looting, pogroms, and even outright massacres. During this period, the term anti-Semitism is coined in the 1870s to describe the systematic prejudice against Jews. Perhaps the most infamous case of the period is the Dreyfus Affair. In 1894, Alfred Dreyfus, a Jewish officer in the French army, is wrongfully convicted of treason. This case exposes the depth of anti-Semitism prejudice, revealing that if Jews are unsafe even in a society as liberal as France was considered at the time, they are indeed not safe anywhere in Europe. However, this surge of nationalism is not confined to European nations alone. Realizing that the threats against them are unlikely to cease and can even worsen, many Jews come to a grim realization. They are not welcome in Europe and might actually never be. Proud of their culture just as much as Europeans are of theirs, they too wish to preserve it. They understand that, to survive as a people, they must do something about it, giving rise to a nationalism of their own. Theodor Herzl, a prominent Jewish thinker of the time, thus proposes a bold solution in response to the escalating anti-Semitic violence. A Jewish state must be established. Jews must return to it, govern themselves, and finally live free from foreign oppression. Thus, Zionism is born. Named after Zion, after a hill in Jerusalem in Jewish tradition, the Zionist movement quickly turns its focus to Ottoman Palestine, viewing it as the biblical promised land, the land of the long-lost kingdom of Israel. To be clear, by the late 19th century, the Ottoman Empire, though still vast, lags significantly in industrialization compared to European powers, making it increasingly vulnerable to external threats. By the 1880s, Ottoman Palestine has a modest population of around 500,000, including 430,000 Muslims, 50,000 Arab Christians, and fewer than 20,000 Jews. With the rise of Hebrew Jewish nationalism, the Zionist movement sparks an initial wave of Jewish migration to Palestine. Between 1881 and 1903, Jews from Europe and Muslim countries like Yemen begin relocating to Ottoman Palestine in what becomes known as the First Aliyah, bringing the Jewish population to around 50,000. These Jewish migrants, who generally possess more disposable income than the local Arab peasantry, initially buy land from Arab landowners through non-profit organizations such as the Jewish National Fund, founded in 1901. However, as Palestine was quite poor by European standards, conducting business proved challenging, leading many Jewish newcomers to become disillusioned, with some even returning to Europe. Notably, among the earliest Jewish settlers was also Eliezer ben Yehuda, a linguist and Zionist from modern-day Belarus, who arrived in Palestine during the First Aliyah with the goal of re-establishing Hebrew as the common language of the Jewish people. At this time, in fact, Jewish migrants to Palestine faced significant language barriers. Some spoke Yiddish, a blend of German and Hebrew. Others spoke Slavic or Romance languages, while those incoming from Muslim-majority countries primarily spoke various forms of Judeo-Arabic. Ben Yehuda and other Zionist pioneers, recognizing the need for a shared language, advocated for Hebrew to be revived and to be used in schools. They published newspapers, literature, and educational materials in Hebrew, promoting it as the primary language for instruction in daily life for Jews. For the past 2 millennia, Hebrew had been mostly confined to religious study and prayer within Judaism. To revive it as a modern language, however, Ben Yehuda and other experts developed new vocabulary to address contemporary concepts, transforming it into a functional spoken language. Within just a few decades, Hebrew became widely used among Jewish communities in Palestine, and was recognized as one of the official languages alongside Arabic. Remarkably, Hebrew remains, to this day, the only language in history successfully revived from near extinction. This early resettlement, however, to be clear, involved only a few thousand Jews. Yet soon, everything would change dramatically. European nationalism, driven by relentless quest for superiority, had not set Europeans only against the world, but also against one another. As Italian futurist writer Filippo Tommaso Marinetti would write in 1909, "We want to glorify war, the world's only hygiene." Nationalism was intensifying tensions between European nations to such an extent that, in 1914, these tensions erupted into the Great War, later famously known as the First World War, a name ominously suggesting there would be a sequel. During this conflict, the Germans sided with the Austro-Hungarians and the Ottomans, while the French, British, and Russians opposed them, with Italy eventually changing sides. The war saw devastating trench warfare, especially on the Western Front, resulting in approximately 16 million casualties. However, for our story, what matters is that the Ottomans were on the losing side and faced severe consequences as a result. Already weakened by Italy's seizure of Libya in 1911 and significant territorial losses from the Balkan Wars, which saw much of their European land absorbed by the newly independent Balkan states, the Ottoman Empire struggled to retain its remaining territories and began to collapse. European powers, especially France and Britain, immediately took advantage of the opportunity to seize as much Ottoman territory as they could. During the war against the Ottomans, Britain had sought support from the Arab world in the Middle East, encouraging Arabs, who were under Ottoman dominion, to rise up against Ottoman rule, leading to the Great Arab Revolt. In exchange for this Arab uprising, Britain, as outlined in the McMahon-Hussein correspondence with Sharif Hussein of Mecca in 1915, promised that it would help Arabs create an independent Arab state in the Middle East, albeit a very undefined one. Once the Ottomans were defeated, and Transjordan with Palestine and Iraq came under British control. However, Britain paused to reconsider the extent of its commitments. And, since these promises were somewhat vague and did not explicitly mention Palestine as part of the proposed Arab state, Britain decided to leave Palestine out of this agreement, as it had been developing another plan for the region for some time. In complete contrast to Arab expectations, Britain, realizing that there were large Jewish communities in both the Russian Empire and the United States, rapidly growing nations and key allies in World War I, coupled with the increasing Jewish migration to Palestine driven by the Zionist movement, Britain saw a strategic advantage, now more than ever, in gaining Jewish support to strengthen its alliances. As such, to build a good relationship with the influential Jewish communities across the world, Britain issued the Balfour Declaration in 1917, pledging to support the creation of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. This move aimed not only to secure Jewish support for Britain, but also to establish a Jewish-British friendly base in Palestine. This move aimed not only to secure Jewish support for Britain, but also to establish a Jewish-British friendly base in Palestine to ensure British control over the strategically vital Suez Canal in British-controlled Egypt. This decision, however, left Arabs feeling deeply betrayed and outraged. If that was not enough, in 1916, Britain and France also secretly signed the Sykes-Picot Agreement, planning to split the Arab provinces of the Ottoman Empire between them. While Britain assumed control over Iraq and Transjordan, France also took control of what is now Syria and Lebanon. Several years after the First World War, in 1920, the League of Nations granted Britain a mandate over Palestine, establishing what became known as Mandatory Palestine. This mandate authorized Britain to fulfill its promise of creating a homeland for the Jewish people, while also committing to protect the rights of the existing Arab population. In 1922, Britain separated Transjordan from Palestine, creating the Emirate of Transjordan, and declaring it exempt from the issue of Jewish resettlement. In British-controlled Palestine, both Zionist Jews and Muslim and Christian Arabs were referred to as Palestinians. They held British passports, and the region officially recognized 3 languages: English, Arabic, and Hebrew. This period, marked by British support for the Zionist cause, saw a significant rise in Jewish immigration to Palestine, a development Arab Palestinians viewed as a betrayal of earlier promises. Tensions quickly escalated. In 1920, the Nabi Musa riots erupted, involving violent clashes between Arab and Jewish civilians. The violence resulted in the deaths of 5 Jews and 4 Arabs, with 200 Jews and 20 Arabs injured. The following year, the Jaffa riots broke out, leading to roughly 50 Arab and 50 Jewish fatalities, along with hundreds more wounded. Concerned that rising tensions might spiral out of control, since Jewish immigration was at the heart of the unrest, Britain issued the Churchill White Paper in 1922. This policy aimed to limit Jewish immigration and land purchases while stopping short of banning them entirely. However, this compromise angered both Arab Palestinians and Jewish organizations like the Jewish Agency and the World Zionist Organization. As Britain enforced restrictions, Zionist leaders, such as David Ben-Gurion, called for negotiations, but these efforts yielded little progress. In response, Jewish groups began organizing illegal immigration efforts, known as Aliyah Bet, to bring Jewish refugees into Palestine, in defiance of British quotas. By 1936, Arab fears of losing their land and becoming a suppressed majority in Palestine led to widespread strikes and protests. This unrest soon escalated into armed attacks on Jewish settlements and British infrastructure. In response, Britain deployed tens of thousands of troops to Palestine to suppress the uprising. Jewish paramilitary groups, such as the Haganah, defended Jewish settlements and critical infrastructure, while smaller groups, like the Irgun, launched retaliatory attacks against the Arab insurgents. In an effort to appease both sides, Britain formed the Peel Commission in 1937, which proposed, for the first time, partitioning Palestine into a Jewish state, an Arab state, and an international zone stretching from Jerusalem to Jaffa. While Jewish leaders debated the proposal and largely accepted it, Arab leaders rejected it outright, leading to further protests or even considering the partition. By 1939, the Arab Revolt had been effectively crushed. British forces, with the support of Jewish paramilitaries, subdued most resistance, killing or capturing approximately 30,000 Arab rebels. Despite this apparent collaboration, at the end of the revolt, Britain surprised many by seeking to appease the Arab population instead. That same year, it issued the White Paper of 1939, which severely restricted Jewish immigration and land acquisition, sparking outrage among the Jewish population. Many Jews felt deeply betrayed, sparking strained British-Jewish relations at a time when one of history's greatest tragedies was about to unfold against the Jewish people on an unprecedented scale. In fact, while life remained challenging for Jews in Palestine, after the Arab Revolt ended in 1939, the mutual distrust between Jews and Arabs undoubtedly persisted. The situation in Palestine was relatively stable compared to the unimaginable suffering Jews were enduring across the Mediterranean in Europe, where their condition was far, far worse. Since the early 1930s, as many of you may already know, events in Europe had been unfolding in ways that would ultimately lead to horrors beyond imagination. At the end of the First World War, there were winners and there were losers. Among the winners was Italy. Initially aligned with Germany and the Austro-Hungarian Empire, Italy was persuaded to switch sides in 1915 by the Secret Treaty of London. In this treaty, France and Britain promised Italian territories, such as Tyrol, parts of Dalmatia, and the city of Fiume, in exchange for joining the Allies. Italy ultimately took the gamble, betting on these promises to secure its national ambitions. At the Treaty of Versailles in 1919, the victorious nations convened to discuss the fate of the defeated powers. For Germany, the consequences were catastrophic. Stripped of significant territories, subjected to severe military restrictions, and burdened with enormous war reparations, payable in gold, Germany's economy was destabilized. Hyperinflation and widespread poverty followed, plunging the country into chaos. Similarly, the Austro-Hungarian Empire was dismantled, leading to the creation of new nations like Czechoslovakia and Yugoslavia. Austria and Hungary were reduced to small, weakened, landlocked states, merely shadows of their former imperial might. For Italy, being on the side of the winners did not yield the rewards it had anticipated. While it did acquire South Tyrol and Trentino from Austria, many of the territories promised in the Treaty of London, such as the Dalmatian coast and the city of Fiume, were denied. The Allies dismissed Italy's broader territorial claims with little consideration. This perceived betrayal became famously known in Italy as the Mutilated Victory, a humiliation that left the Italian people demanding retribution. Capitalizing on growing discontent, in Italy, Benito Mussolini emerged as a figure of ambition and power. In 1922, he led the infamous March on Rome, mobilizing his black shirt militias and presenting himself as the only solution to Italy's instability. Through his bold display of force, Mussolini pressured the Italian king Victor Emmanuel III to appoint him as prime minister. Once in power, Mussolini moved quickly to consolidate control through military and political maneuvers. Rallying the people with his motto, "Believe, obey, fight," he styled himself as Il Duce, promising to restore Italy's greatness by forging a strong, centralized state, revitalizing the economy, and reclaiming Italy's place as a dominant world power. Under Mussolini's regime, opposition parties were banned, press freedoms dismantled, and secret police infiltrated every aspect of public and private life. The government took control of education, indoctrinating the youth with propaganda glorifying the state and Mussolini as its savior. Workers were organized into corporatist unions, dominated by the regime, while vast public works projects and militarization campaigns instilled national pride and prepared Italy for global conquest under the vision of a new Roman Empire. The betrayal of Italy's mutilated victory, coupled with Mussolini's iron-fisted rule, transformed the nation into a totalitarian state, an authoritarian regime built on obedience, sacrifice, and relentless propaganda. During Mussolini's rule, Italy sought to expand its empire by invading Ethiopia in 1935. However, the military's weaknesses quickly became apparent as Italian forces struggled against Ethiopia's resistance. In response, Mussolini ordered the use of poisonous gas and other internationally banned tactics, openly violating the rules of war. And while the League of Nations condemned these atrocities, one man stood in admiration: Adolf Hitler. Born in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, Adolf Hitler fled to Germany as a young adult to avoid arrest for evading the military draft. Once in Germany, he enlisted in the Reichswehr, the German army, and served during World War I alongside German troops. At the end of the war, Hitler witnessed the collapse of both the Austro-Hungarian Empire and Germany. The Treaty of Versailles left Germany humiliated, its economy devastated, and its population mired in poverty and widespread discontent. This national humiliation stoked demands for revenge and created fertile ground for radical political movements. The rise of fascism in Italy during the early 1920s inspired similar ideologies across Europe. Many nations, burdened by post-war despair, saw fascism as a potential solution, a way to rebuild, restore national pride, and seek retribution. Win, we will win. Against this backdrop, Hitler joined the German Workers' Party, transforming it into the National Socialist German Workers' Party, commonly known as the Nazi Party. Through incendiary speeches, he channeled Germany's anger, blaming its struggles on internal and external enemies, and quickly gained widespread support. In 1923, Hitler staged a failed coup, the Beer-Hall Putsch, which led to his arrest and imprisonment. During his incarceration, he authored Mein Kampf, My Struggle, a manifesto outlining his vision for a greater Germany. This vision emphasized ultranationalism, the racial purity of the so-called Aryan race to which Germans were said to belong, and the concept of Lebensraum, living space, a plan for territorial expansion to secure resources for the German people. Upon his release, Hitler rebuilt the Nazi Party, employing propaganda and violence to consolidate power, much like Mussolini had done in fascist Italy. By 1933, Hitler had risen to the position of Chancellor of Germany, presenting himself as the savior of a humiliated nation. He declared himself Führer, leader, under the motto, "One people, one empire, one leader." Hitler established his regime, the Third Reich. After becoming Chancellor, much like Mussolini, Hitler suspended civil liberties. He orchestrated mass arrests of political opponents. He granted himself legislative powers and dissolved the parliament. Nazi propaganda, led by Joseph Goebbels, infiltrated every aspect of life, through radios, pamphlets, posters, revised education, films, books, and more, glorifying Hitler and the regime while silencing dissent. The Gestapo and SS enforced brutal suppression, and concentration camps were established to detain and eliminate perceived enemies. Through indoctrination, militarization, and terror, Hitler rapidly constructed a totalitarian regime that plunged Germany into oppression and fear. However, Hitler significantly diverged from Mussolini in one aspect. Hitler believed that the so-called Aryan race, to which Germans supposedly belonged, was superior. This master race, he argued, needed to purify itself of those he deemed impure: the disabled, Romani people, homosexuals, Jehovah's Witnesses, and others. These individuals were subjected to forced sterilization to prevent them from reproducing, imprisonment in camps, or outright extermination. Among those Hitler targeted most viciously were the Jews. To Hitler, Jews were not only racial inferiors, but, in his view, Untermenschen, subhumans, the real root cause of Germany's suffering. He blamed them for Germany's defeat in World War I, perpetuating the stab-in-the-back myth, a false narrative claiming that Germany's military had not been defeated on the battlefield, but betrayed by internal enemies, particularly Jews and communists from within. Hitler also accused Jews of orchestrating communism, capitalism, and other ideologies he claimed were designed to corrupt and weaken German society. To him, eliminating Jews was a necessary step to secure Germany's rightful dominance. Upon Hitler's rise to power, anti-Jewish policies were implemented immediately. Jews were barred from holding positions in government, civil service, law, medicine, and education. The Nazi Party also promoted boycotts of Jewish-owned businesses, branding them as enemies of the state. Jewish books and writings were publicly burned in a campaign to purge un-German ideas from society. The persecution escalated with the 1935 Nuremberg Laws. The law for the protection of German blood and honor prohibited marriages and relationships between Jews and Germans. Under the Reich citizenship law, Jews were stripped of their German citizenship, reducing them to stateless persons. Between 1937 and 1938, Jews were forced to register their businesses, which were then confiscated and transferred to German owners in a process known as Aryanization. Jewish professionals, including doctors and lawyers, were banned from practicing their trades. On November 9th to 10th, 1938, the Nazis launched a coordinated pogrom across Germany and Austria, known as Kristallnacht, the Night of Broken Glass. Synagogues were burned, Jewish businesses and homes were destroyed, and approximately 30,000 Jewish men were arrested and sent to concentration camps. This event marked a shift from economic and social exclusion to state-imposed violence and mass incarceration. By early 1939, Jews faced mounting pressure by the German government to leave Germany. However, those attempting to flee encountered heavy taxation and were often stripped of their assets, including jewelry and belongings, at border checkpoints. Despite their dire circumstances, few countries were willing to accept large numbers of Jewish refugees, leaving many trapped within Nazi-controlled territories. Adding to this persecution, Benito Mussolini, seeking to strengthen Italy's alliance with Hitler and avoid losing face, enacted similar anti-Jewish laws. These laws banned Jews from public life, forcing professors and teachers to lose their jobs, barring Jewish children from schools, and compelling many Jewish families to relocate out of Italy. This widespread persecution caused a significant brain drain in both Germany and Italy. Albert Einstein, a German Jew, emigrated to the United States, where he made groundbreaking contributions to physics, including the theory of relativity. Similarly, Enrico Fermi, whose wife was Jewish, left Italy for the United States, where his work advanced nuclear energy, the Fermi paradox, and more. The horrible condition of Jews worsened enormously when Britain passed the 1939 White Paper, as we have previously discovered, severely restricting Jewish migration to Palestine in an effort to appease the Arab population, which, during the Great Arab Revolt, possibly received support from both fascist Italy and Nazi Germany. Trapped in Nazi Germany, Jews found themselves with few options for escape. In response, Jewish paramilitary groups in Palestine, like the Irgun, the Haganah, and Lehi, resorted to acts of terrorism, including bombings, assassinations of British officials, and attacks on British infrastructure, such as railways, harbors, and military installations. Their goal was to pressure Britain to reopen Palestine's borders, while appealing to allied nations for support. But to no avail, nobody was listening. On September 1st, 1939, Germany invaded Poland, marking the beginning of World War II. This invasion was not just a military campaign. Poland was home to 3 million Jews, the largest Jewish population in Europe. As German forces advanced, Jewish communities in the occupied territories were rounded up and confined to ghettos, while new concentration camps, such as Auschwitz, Treblinka, Belzec, and Sobibor, were under construction. In these camps, Jews faced systematic dehumanization upon arrival. Their heads were shaved, and their hair was processed and sold to textile industries. Gold teeth were extracted from their mouths. Jewelry and personal belongings were confiscated. They were stripped of their clothes, forced into identical uniforms, and tattooed with identification numbers to erase their individual identities. Conditions in the concentration camps were horrific. Prisoners were crammed into overcrowded barracks without heating, causing many to freeze to death during harsh winters. The lack of sanitation fostered the spread of diseases such as typhus. Under brutal supervision, inmates were subjected to grueling labor, leading many to die from exhaustion. Starvation was rampant. The meager rations left prisoners in a constant state of extreme hunger and weight loss. Desperate, many resorted to eating insects, rats, or any scraps they could find, though countless still succumbed to hunger. By 1941, Hitler's regime implemented the final solution to the Jewish question, a coordinated plan of mass extermination. Jews were herded into gas chambers where Zyklon B was released, suffocating them to death. Their bodies were then cremated to erase any trace of their existence. Families were torn apart upon arrival, with children and the elderly often sent directly to the gas chambers, deemed unfit for forced labor. Those spared immediate execution faced inhumane medical experiments, forced labor, starvation, and eventual death. Benito Mussolini, seeking to recreate a new Roman Empire and expand his territories, allied with Hitler. Together with Emperor Hirohito's Japan in Asia, they formed the Axis powers. However, despite Mussolini's ambitions, Italy's economic struggles left its military poorly equipped, resulting in widespread confusion and discontent among his population. As partisan movements gained momentum in northern Italy, Mussolini eventually lost support and was ultimately captured and executed by partisans. Exploiting the chaos in Italy, Germany swiftly occupied the country, rounding up Italian Jews and deporting them to concentration camps. In contrast, countries like Denmark actively resisted Nazi efforts. Danish citizens famously smuggled most of their Jewish population to neutral Sweden with false documents. Across Europe, despite the threat of severe retaliation, many civilians risked their lives to hide or aid Jews, saving countless lives. Although the Axis powers initially appeared unstoppable, the tide of the war eventually turned. The Soviet Union, the United States, advancing through the Italian peninsula, and Britain gradually reclaimed occupied territories. Allied forces closed in on Berlin, where Hitler, hiding in a bunker, ultimately took his own life to avoid capture. World War II resulted in an estimated 70 to 85 million deaths. The victims included countless German soldiers, Polish Jewish civilians, Soviet soldiers and civilians, Chinese civilians, those who died of starvation in the Dutch East Indies, modern-day Indonesia, under Japanese occupation, and many, many more. After the war, the Nazi Party was dismantled. At the Nuremberg trials in 1946, held in Germany, key Nazi leaders were charged with human rights violations, war crimes, and the genocide of 6 million Jewish people. Some of them managed to escape to South America. Many were sentenced to death, others to life in prison. With the conclusion of the trials, one of history's darkest chapters finally came to an end, signaling the beginning of a new era. This is the end of part 3. There are 4 parts in total. Since this documentary requires extensive editing, we decided to release it in 4 parts rather than making you wait for the full version. Once all 4 parts are complete, we will combine them into a full-length documentary. If you'd like to support our mission to spread knowledge, consider becoming a Patreon member, sending a super thanks donation here on YouTube, or joining as a channel member. Please do not donate through Apple Pay, as Apple will take a 30% cut. Your support helps us speed up video production and expand to more languages worldwide, such as Spanish, French, German, Italian, Brazilian Portuguese, Indonesian, Hindi, and much more, reaching an even broader audience. Thank you very much for waiting. We hope you've learned something new today. Have a great day.